All right, welcome everybody. Today's session is strategies for tutoring non-traditional learners. This is going to be a little bit of a departure from the college definition of non-traditional, which is just anyone who is not 18 when they start. What I mean when I say non-traditional learners are people with complex diagnoses, maybe not complex diagnoses, let's not get that ahead of ourselves, but other things in their lives that are going to be contributing to behavioral scenarios that may complicate your tutoring. So the objectives of this session are you're going to learn 2 frameworks for responding to student behavioral challenges. These are broad frameworks that I could do separate presentations on in full scale, hour plus long stuff. So we're going to go briefly into those. I do have the general websites where you can learn more at the bottom of the screen. But we will just touch on those and then we'll focus on how we're going to apply them for our students. You're also going to learn about the common behaviors of individuals with social disabilities or mental health barriers, just in case these are things that you may be seeing but not recognizing. I did go into autism a little bit more in depth. I did not have the space to go through all of the common, depression, anxiety. I believe I might have one slide on ADHD, but there's certainly room for a part 2 of this scenario. The topic got way bigger than expected. You're also going to go on through some example scenarios with possible interventions. And those interventions I did collect from a working professional. And we'll finish out with community resources because there's a part of this conversation that is appropriate for you. And there's a part of this conversation where tutors may not have as much of a place in. And that's where your student will be working with someone who is better prepared in the field and more able to help effectively. Okay. On the agenda for today, our slides are going to first jump into those theories, and then we're going to follow a theory, practice, resources scenario. So in practice, we'll talk about a framework for response and those scenarios as well. We'll finish out with the resources, and then after the scope of this recording, we'll have time for any questions or if you have some specific student scenarios you'd like to discuss. This presentation will provide strategies drawing from the following theories of behavioral intervention and education. The first is universal design for learning, which we'll go more in depth here in a minute. The second is collaborative and proactive solutions, or CPS. Not to be confused with Child Protective Services. I know it's an unfortunate acronym. Both theories are grounded in mutual respect and offer solutions involving centering on student input. Beginning with UDL, Universal Design for Learning is a research-based framework developed by CAST to optimize teaching for all learners by providing flexible learning environments, methods, and materials. It aims to reduce barriers to learning by providing multiple means of engagement, representation, and action. And they're kind of breaking down the process of teaching and the process of learning into these 3 scenarios. So it's the why is your student learning, what are they learning, and how are they showing you what they have learned. A little bit more on that. Engagement is the foundation of this theory. As we all know, good motivation comes intrinsically. Maybe that's outdated concept now, but we need engagement from our students in order to effectively work with them. That means that our first step as educators is to make sure that we know why our students are here. We need to recruit their interest. That also applies to the prolonged effort. We're always returning to this, not just why did they sign up, but how can we sustain effort and encourage persistence? And in times of trouble, how do we incentivize self-regulation? The second part is representation. This is likely what you think of when you think of teaching. It's how are we engaging with the material? I know it's the what part, but it's how we're engaging with the material, what we're presenting, what ways can we perceive the material? This is where you're going to find things like the learning styles coming into play. This is also where we may find issues with comprehension coming up, among other things. The final is how the student shows competency. So action and expression. This would be the difference between can someone act out a Shakespearean play or put on a group project versus answering test questions about it, right? So it may pertain to what style the student is most comfortable with, but there are multiple avenues for showing competency as well. You can think of UDL as the adjustable car seat of education. I got this from a video that's commonly shown with adult education. It was I think it was the Army or I guess it would be whoever has the planes, right? But they were running out of fighter pilots, and they, in order to get more, they made their program more accessible to more people by introducing adjustable cockpit seats. So adult education frequently supports learners who were left behind in K-12 education for a number of reasons, right? And if we think about this metaphor of having an adjustable seat, if we're driving a car that cannot move the seat forward or backward, that's eliminating people by height. If we're driving a car that cannot adjust the seat to lean, that's eliminating people on the basis of comfort, on the basis of arms wingspan. Some people will fit to drive the car. However, there will be many more people left behind. So we can think of UDL as the framework with which we can make an adjustable system for education. So for our purposes, what we're using this theory for today is remembering engagement is the foundation of good instruction. We need the buy-in of our students, and we need them to be on board because this is ultimately for them, right? We also need to think challenges can occur at any stage of this framework. So as we're coming up and identifying reactions, what is causing that issue? Is it a mismatch of understanding the purpose of the assignment? Is it how the assignment is being done? Or is it how they are showing they understand, right? Don't be afraid to think outside the box. How is the student struggling? Is there another way the information can be presented? Is there another way the student can show their competency? As a final note on this theory in particular, Literacy Pittsburgh staff have done training on UDL concepts, including all of your area program coordinators. So if you're interested and have questions, we can discuss with you in a more personal setting on some ways to apply UDL concepts to your tutoring practice. Now jumping into the other theory. Collaborative and proactive solutions, or CPS, is an evidence-based approach developed by a clinical child psychologist named Dr. Ross Green. Rather than focusing on concerning behaviors and modifying them, he theorized that that we should help individuals and caregivers solve problems causing those behaviors. The problem-solving system is meant to be collaborative, as in not unilateral, and involves both parties working proactively, not reactively. So not in a state of dysregulation or reaction to the behavior, but looking forward and doing it with input from all parties. Just a note on that, Literacy Pittsburgh students are all adult learners, or most of our areas have only adult learners. As such, adult learners always face complex challenges to studying and achieving their goals. Applying theories developed for the youth must always be done with care. I am not applying the exact concept of this theory. I am applying the concept of coming together mutually to discuss things and using the framework tools created in order to facilitate that for adults. It's important to me that I note that students are responsible for themselves and always know their own lives and own minds better than any loved one, supporter, or professional. So we can offer guidance, we can set boundaries for ourselves, but we cannot and should not aim to control the student's behavior. So the CPS model is people do well if they can, as in when they have the tools, both internally, mentally, physically, their own capability-wise, and externally. They have the paper, pencils, book, time, space to meet. People will do well when they're working on a goal that they actually want to work on, right? So the CPS framework views challenges as a puzzle. So a person not meeting expectations is less a problem than not a problem in a derogatory sense, but a problem in the sense of like a math problem. We now have a case and we must find a solution. Sometimes the expectations may be wrong, or sometimes the problem is in the process. So considerations here that are important is everyone has a reason for what they do. What is the reason? That seems really maybe obvious to state in a theoretical capacity here, but the amount of times that we overlook this when we are doing behavior interventions is astounding. What does the student perceive as the problem to overcome? If I'm speaking with someone, I may have a different view of what is happening than what they do coming from inside their own head. How do they engage with the challenge presented, and where do they see the barrier coming into play? You also want to reflect on their responses, reflect their responses back, so that you can confirm that you are understanding. That's just good communication skills. And then you're free to share your perspective and start the dialogue back and forth. When evaluating a problem with CPS, you must understand how the student views the challenge. How do they feel about the entire event? Are there outside circumstances we're not considering? Do they even consider it a problem? Do they see the problem the same way you do? And what do they think is the cause? Reflect on those responses and confirm your understanding, and then find the gap between the student's ability and the demands of the learning. So what do you need to happen? What are they able to accomplish? And how do you bring those two scenarios together? Ask yourself, knowing what you need, or ask the student, knowing what you need and what I need or the situation calls for, what solution can you think of that would address these concerns? And that way, the student is putting forward the solution first, and you can go based off of them, and that increases the buy-in in the solution as well. So that way, both parties are invested in finding a way forward, and that improves outcomes that way. Once you understand one another, you can find a solution. Oh, I'm sorry, I think this duplicated. The only new part here is the repetitive process. You may land on a solution that seems really great in theory, and when you apply it, a new issue comes up. You then rinse and repeat, right? Simple as that. So those are our two theories. As you can see, both of them are student-centered. Both of them are encouraging you to think outside the box and meant to be collaborative. Now let's take a look at some common student behaviors. I know some of you will likely be familiar with different diagnoses of disabilities, mental health, histories of trauma, or I'm losing the word, people in recovery, histories of addiction, excuse me. These can have similar or overlapping behaviors to them, but for some of our tutors who are maybe newer to the social services field, this can be important to highlight. So let's talk about some common behaviors that may be indicative that you have a non-traditional student. Okay. So adult students bring their personal history with them. For some, that may include mental health, disabilities, traumatic events in their past, and maladaptive coping strategies. Behaviors resulting from these experiences can look pretty familiar. They might include time management. That can be struggling to meet on time, struggling to set aside time for tasks, struggling to remember meetings or schedules. Task completion. That can be freezing when asked to do things, avoidant behaviors, or just generally getting overwhelmed when asked to do too many things at once. Inattention. That can apply to organization, trouble focusing on one thing at a time, have it being everywhere all at once because you're trying to do 7 things at one time. That's pretty common. Emotional dysregulation. This can be getting easily frustrated, having a student that's quick to temper or quick to despair, quick to give up. It can also mean disproportionate reactions to things. Or this is not, I forgot to write this down. It can also be difficulty calming down after an event that would cause dysregulation. Hyperactivity, that can be difficulty sitting still, it could be fidgeting or bouncing your leg. It can also be doing too many things at one time. Social difficulty, misunderstanding social cues, or not being aware of the social setting expectations. Lethargy, having little energy in sessions, frequently missing sessions, perhaps. Hyperfixation, starting on a topic and then having difficulty moving in a different direction. difficulty setting something aside for even a short amount of time, or moving on
the
when
urge.
asked. We also see resistance to change. So that can be trouble transitioning between activities. That can be trouble with a disrupted schedule, or dysregulation in an unfamiliar situation. And finally, we see avoidance. That can be willfully or passively refusing to engage. Perhaps this is ghosting when you are trying to schedule something, or refusing an activity flat out. This is often an anxiety based reaction. So, when students are having a behavior, any of the behaviors on that list, if a student is calm, you can follow the CPS framework and engage in a conversation directly. That would mean identifying the behavior that you saw, determining if the student also noticed the behavior. Oftentimes they will, especially if it's someone who is diagnosed with a disability. Um, Most often, students are very familiar with their tendencies. So, asking them if they have identified it and how they perceive it, and going from there following CPS. However, if this behavior is happening and a student is dysregulated, meaning that a student is upset and to a degree where they are unable to focus, having heightened emotions, make sure that you de escalate first. And a note on de escalation: when we are de escalating, the goal is not to teach, reprimand, or to help understand. De escalation is only about bringing someone back to a neutral state. In fact, when someone is escalated, the amygdala fires and dampens the problem solving and reasoning parts of the brain. So even if you were to try to teach someone or have it be an impressionable moment, it would not effectively address the behavior, as the problem solving parts necessary are not in prime form at that time. De-escalation is not an instinctual behavior, it is a learned skill. It is also an essential life skill and essential in the workplace. So don't think of de-escalation as a departure from your time as a tutor. De-escalation is your time teaching life skills. It's the same concept as asking for your student to be on time in order to enforce that habit for later success, right? A dysregulated student does not have to be loud. Avoidance can be a dysregulated reaction. So, when looking for signs of dysregulation, students can be high energy or low energy. Think fight, flight, or freeze, right? If a response seems out of character, or out of the scope that you would expect for the setting, that's a good sign. That's a sign that the person is dysregulated, not a good sign. Um, with students who more regularly become dysregulated, use CPS and UDL to find more manageable ways to engage. Identify if there's a pattern causing the dysregulation, and maybe utilize some common interactions like taking breaks, setting timers for tasks, giving more consistency, or changing the time of day that you're meeting, a bunch of general interaction opportunities there. Okay. So, for those of you whose student may have disclosed a diagnosis, here are some other behaviors that you will see with autism specifically. I put these in here because I am finding many tutors find this to be a little bit reverse to what you would expect with neurotypical students and how to engage with them. So I thought it was important to highlight this and explain why we do what we do in these scenarios. So one of the first, people with autism struggle with all of the same behaviors that were listed previously that apply to other mental health diagnoses, PTSD, all of those things as well. These are just a few special case scenarios to highlight. So people with autism often struggle with hypothetical scenarios, as those take more energy to process. So in order to assist with that, set clear expectations for what you are asking. The more concrete that you can word a question, the less energy your student will have to expend on navigating the interaction. Ask questions that draw on previous experience or memory instead of more nebulous questions. For example, instead of, "Can you give me an example?" you could try, "Can you tell me about a time when you experienced that?" For this reason, students may also do well with visual aids for words, because they make things more concrete as well. Another special case is struggling with transition. Sorry, not special case. This is also common, but this is pretty specific as well. Transitioning from one line of thinking to another is a pretty energetically demanding process, but it is more energetically demanding for someone with autism than it is for a neurotypical individual. In order to assist with this, make sure that you're asking one question at a time as often as you can. Your student may be able to handle more or less, so you can judge based on your history with them. You may also want to plan ahead. Changes in the schedule, changes in the place that you're meeting, the way that you're doing your routine, all of this will add this latent energy demand onto your session. And so, as much as you can, plan ahead. You may want to consider making a plan A for if things go perfectly and a plan B if things go into upheaval, and share both with your student in advance so that they can know what the plan is. Beyond that, consistency and routine will go far. Keeping the same layout for your schedule, keeping the same framework for where you meet, when you meet, how long the meeting is, how much time per session that you spend on warm up versus if you can give a break in the middle of the session. All of that will reduce stress and then free up more energy for their studies. Sometimes I describe this as being comforting. That may not be the most accurate way of describing that. It is truly in the same way that people with ADHD may spend more time masking and take more energy away from the other activities that they are doing. This can remove some of that latent energy demand as well. As another note, when you are using CPS with a student with autism, try to tell the student in advance what is going on, or give some other concrete expectation for what you're asking. You can set a timer for how long the conversation is planned for. You can set a certain number of questions that you're going to ask. I have some papers or worksheets that you can use for written questions of what they should expect to be asked. That way, there is a framework to rely on when you are having a very loose conversation by necessity. One other one other behavior here that you may encounter is sensitivity, whether hypersensitivity or hyposensitivity. That can be related to any of the five senses. And you may see this as a student asking to use headphones frequently, maybe coming with specific clothing, compression vests, or other materials meant to kind of take away some of the edge of what they're experiencing. This may also contribute in the way that if someone is experiencing hypersensitivity, they may act out in different behaviors from the previous list, um, you know, being fidgety, moving around, not focused. This could be because of hypersensitivity. Masking, I just said before that it was highly related to ADHD as well. Masking is the word for the constant use of energy and emotional investment in order to downplay symptoms of a diagnosis for purposes of being perceived as more neurotypical. So, as you can imagine, if you're constantly in the back of your head taking in information about what other people are doing and then trying to make your behaviors match, that is going to be an energetic situation. So if you are meeting with a student at the end of a long work day, when they may have been masking for several hours, you may see more behaviors because you're at the end of the energy depletion, right? On the other side of things, as your student meets with you, develops a relationship, potentially becomes more comfortable, you may see more pronounced behaviors as they grow to become more comfortable with you. Okay. Please forgive my very dense block of text from on ADHD. This was trying to condense slides at a last minute moment. So let's go through this real quick here. So ADHD is pretty commonly known. It used to be called ADD or ADHD. Now it is just ADHD with hyperactivity or without hyperactivity. So people know this one as being easily distractible, having trouble focusing on things, maybe issues with time management, time blindness is a common thing. So a few notes here. The stereotypical ADHD that we've been trained to see, the kind of like always running around, can't sit still kind of person, is a very gendered stereotype. We have been finding out more recently that girls with ADHD tend to be less aware of it and underdiagnosed because it doesn't manifest as frequently with that hyperactivity. Many go undiagnosed because their presentation doesn't exhibit the same disruptive behaviors as their male counterparts. When I was speaking with the counselor I collaborated with, I was asking him to describe how he interacts with families dealing with ADHD and disruptive behaviors related to that. And he said, imagine that you are in a desert and you find an oasis. Then someone tells you to leave. You wouldn't want to leave, right? So that is a metaphor for ADHD is a lack in dopamine in the brain. And dopamine not only is a happy chemical, it helps you to focus, it helps in executive function. And so when people with ADHD are having this chronic depletion of their dopamine, when it can show up as them playing video games all night, not being able to stop, or finding a particular interest that they're very excited about and wanting to talk to you about it all the time.
Mhm.
Maybe if that interest comes up in the book and you have a really hard time pulling them away, right? This is the visual. They've found the oasis. It gives them the dopamine. They have a chronic lack of this necessary chemical in their brain, and we need them to be able to leave the oasis in order to function in society as it stands. How do we do that, right? We have to figure out how they can take some of the oasis with them. So that can mean making the activity at hand more interesting so it gives a little bit more fun, more dopamine. It can also mean taking smaller sessions, taking breaks more frequently, using the dopamine fulfilling behavior as a reward in the middle of your session, perhaps. Um, all of these things are likely things that your student has already engaged with and already started to explore. So it's very important to ask them, what brings you joy? What do you do when you have a task that you really don't want to do? Um, and you can build from there what your practice would look like. And maybe that means that instead of the prescribed straight through 2 hour session exactly as it is, you build in an extra 15 to 30 minutes and you have a break in the middle where you guys just talk about the new TV show that everybody's watching, right? Okay. Another thing that is commonly associated with ADHD are fidgets. And these got really big in popular culture, so I expect that most people know about them. They come in a lot of different forms. They're usually small, supposed to be unobtrusive. Sometimes they make really satisfying noises. Sometimes they just offer something to do with your hands. Maybe they spin. Maybe they're like little button cubes or tubes that pull apart or buttons to push. They have a number of different forms. And there are a lot of people that make fidgets that are, trying to make them so that people can use them in class. But they kind of got this reputation as being disruptive or annoying whenever teachers were seeing them in their classes recently. So I just wanted to take a moment to explain how fidgets help your student when they need them. It's a brain body balance. So when you're dealing with ADHD, your brain is all over the place. It is looking everywhere, seeking dopamine in whatever place it possibly can get it. Um, when by fidgeting, it allows the body to move around instead. And it helps you to reach an equilibrium where your brain can move a little bit more slowly because your body is moving more quickly. So it raises the alertness just enough so that you can keep your mind focused on whatever task is in front of you. Okay. A note on PTSD. Um, PTSD can share many behaviors with ADHD, anxiety, or depression. An example here, a student who is fidgeting may be unfocused or they may be hypervigilant, as in checking corners for something that has set them off, right? PTSD is different because of the focus of it. When it comes to the behaviors, we see the same behaviors. It is not our job to identify why the student is doing a particular thing. Our job is to speak with the student, and if the behavior is truly disruptive to their goals and their education, work with them on a solution together. Jumping into the practice here, we're going to go right into prepared scenarios. So, a student with autism is meeting with their tutor or teacher in a public setting, but they continually take their shoes off. I first want to consider why the student is doing this. So I have a conversation with the student, and there are a number of options. Does anybody have any ideas for why a student might be taking their shoes off in a public setting?
I wonder if they take their shoes off at home.
Yeah. So that is actually a really common scenario. So one thing that we see a lot is the student is anxious, and when they go home, they take their shoes off. So it's kind of just like made that connection in their brain that when I'm anxious, I take my shoes off, it makes me less anxious. Shoes are sensory distractions when they're on. Absolutely. Who knows? Maybe the rubber of the shoes is grating on the floor in that place, right? Maybe their shoes were okay outside, but once they got in here, it's the particular environment. Exactly right. We can see there are already two very common and very reasonable scenarios as to why this would happen. However, obviously, having a student take their shoes off in a public setting is not a very desirable thing when we are out in the community. Many people react badly to this, and having someone come up and react badly to the student can only could cause more stress, excuse me. So when we are addressing the student, what would we want to do to open up a conversation about this? I guess I just said it, right? Um, so we're starting the conversation with the student. Um, what what would you say to your student to engage with this? Can somebody give an example?
I think I'd say, how are you feeling?
Yeah. How are you feeling? Maybe can you tell me what you were feeling when you took your shoes off?
Yeah.
Are your shoes bothering you? Yeah. We can see there's kind of a balance here between we want to be specific to the behavior we want addressed, but we want to be open enough to allow for answers that aren't our own. Did I hear someone else unmute? I'm sorry if I'm talking over anybody. Okay, let's try another one. A student is consistently missing their meetings, even when setting reminders. What might be happening here? And there is not one answer to any of these scenarios, just so we're clear there.
Losing interest.
Losing interest, possibly, yeah. What else might be happening?
Or they're hyper focused on something else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I I see a lot of students really eager coming into the program because we were their hyper focus. They needed a GED, they needed to learn English. They're coming and they're here and they want to get it as soon as possible. And then something else comes up and it becomes a little bit more of a struggle. Absolutely. Might have trouble physically getting to the meeting. Absolutely. Don't discount the Maslow's hierarchy barriers. Do they have the things that they need to live their life safely, comfortably, and to the fullest? Because self-actualization and getting to your future is higher up on those needs, right? We're going to be knocked down the list if they're hungry or can't get there. Um, Work is hard, reminds them of past failures. Absolutely. Absolutely. When we, that's a good reminder. We didn't talk about that, but there are statistics out there where people with ADHD by the age of 12 are marginally more likely to get more negative stimulus than their neurotypical child counterparts. So there can be some sensitivity there, even if you have never done that, right? Many of our students might be expecting to have a negative reaction and anticipating that in advance. And sometimes with enough of that, your brain starts to be the negative stimulus, right? A whole lifetime of habitually doing other things. Absolutely. It is hard to break habits. We can want to break habits, but that is a special skill, and consistency takes time, and sometimes we fail in the middle of that. The important part is incentivizing coming back, making sure that you are still welcoming to your student when that happens. How will we identify what the actual problem with mystery student is? This is going to sound really repetitive. What's our first step? Talk with the student. Excellent. Thank you. Again, we can assume that, or we can theorize. We have eyes, we can take in information, we can see patterns and evaluate scenarios. It doesn't matter if we're right about what's happening if the student thinks otherwise, right? We cannot get around that buy-in piece, that engagement piece from the universal design for learning. It has to be the foundation. So when we're talking about something fundamental like this, that you can't even get your student to consistently meet with you, that we need to make that a collaborative conversation, even if we are reasonably sure of what's going on. Okay. And if the student comes to you and agrees, they say that's exactly what's happening, you have the satisfaction of being right. But keep that satisfaction in your own head, right? Nothing's gonna de-incentivize someone like an I told you so. From the point, let's say that the student says that they are late because they're missing meetings because they got a new job and it's really hard to manage their work schedule with their tutoring schedule. What might be some interventions that we could suggest?
I would try to see both my schedule and the students, if there's another time to meet, or maybe break it up. We're not always going to meet from 2 to 3 on this day. We're going to meet from 4 to 5 or whatever. Just try to, I mean, it would have to be mutual, but sensitive.
Mm-hmm. I like where your heart is at with that. I like the collaborative approach. I would make an argument that if the student is having to manage their work schedule and the tutoring schedule, adding more flux into that may only make it more demanding for them to manage on schedule. So, yeah. And that might not be the case, but it's an important thing I think you may want to consider in this situation. Oftentimes, students also jump over the possibility of talking to their employers. That can be a really scary concept. But more employers than we think are willing to set a schedule so that their students can meet. This is not every employer. I just want to say that out loud. And when it comes to job to support my family or GED, it will always be job, right?
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes that fear is misplaced, and actually employers are very interested in engaging with that. This, because it's a common scenario that comes up, other things that I have seen are finding low barrier to entry ways to keep a schedule, setting your tutoring so that the employer knows what days the tutoring will be and you have the reminder for yourself. And that reminder goes off automatically and happens the week of and the day before, or whatever frequency that needs it to be. Sometimes that reminder has to come in the form of a text message direct from someone and have that weight of social expectations in order for it to have the respect that it needs, but that can be an effective intervention. I guess it does say even with reminders on the slide, huh? This is likely going to be a scenario where you will come up with something and then come back to it. If this is a situation where a student is burnt out, perhaps a student is running on all cylinders and it is just not in the cards to keep everything straight. Or maybe this is a long-term form of dysregulation where they are not taking time for themselves. They are pouring from an empty cup, per se, and the executive function skills are lacking. Having kindness there is important. There's also always the opportunity to take a break for a time and come back. So prioritizing rest and making sure that your student has their needs met can also be an effective intervention here. My student is passionate about dinosaurs. No, let's not do that. Let's do, my student is passionate about the Civil War and always wants to study the Civil War. How do I redirect them to other GED topics than social studies? I think we can probably skip the first part of this of why it's happening. No, actually, why might someone only want to talk about the Civil War when they're studying? What are some options? Dopamine. Yeah. They feel they know about it. Yeah. Could also be that. So dopamine meaning that they are excited by it. They want to talk about it. It's their favorite topic, maybe. But also maybe it's a comfort thing. It's their current hyper focus. Absolutely. Absolutely. So maybe in 3 months, dinosaurs is the thing that they want to talk about, and it's all ancient history from there. Um, I like the distinction. That was what I was trying to draw out. That it could be a pleasure seeking thing where they really enjoy this topic and they want to talk about it. Maybe other people aren't willing to engage with them. Maybe they don't have a strong community around them and they want to share about this thing with somebody. That is a different scenario than if they feel they know a lot about it and this is a comfort, right? So they could be hyper, in both cases, I would say it's hyper focus, but they could be hyper focused on this topic because they want to be on that topic, or they could be focused on that topic because they don't want to be on other topics, right? So maybe they're avoiding the topics that they know are on the plan to study. Yeah, they might need to get their thoughts out of their head and onto paper before moving on. I am one of these people. If I have something going on in my head, I need to sit down and type it out before I can do anything productive. Absolutely. So, in the scenario where this is a joyous thing that they're doing, this is giving them dopamine, what might we do in this student's case? Any ideas?
Maybe each session there could be set aside, okay, now so and so, we're going to talk about the Civil War for this many minutes, and then we'll go on to something else. And the next time we'll, break it up.
Absolutely. Leaning in. I love the use of a warm up section for that. I know it's pretty common with some of my ESL groups that the warm up question is something related to what they've been really interested in so that they can talk about that. Absolutely. I see in the chat a couple answers. We've got, can you think of a way that our study topic relates to that? Very great. So bringing the engagement to them, right? Seeing the connection, that is an excellent way. And I think very related to, at the least, to the UDL framework of engagement, right? We want the student to buy into what they're learning so that way they are passionate about it intrinsically, and that increases the amount of information that they will be willing to take in there. Talk about how it relates to other wars. Absolutely. So we can see some really strong ways to transfer that into social studies, right? Or into reading skills. We could find topics of that person's special interest that are at their reading level and then use it to teach certain vocabulary words or certain grammar, right? We can use that topic and adapt it. But when it comes to we have to change topic in order to fulfill the purpose of the lesson, we may also want to use this as an incentive. Maybe this is the reward for doing something that they would rather avoid as well. So leaving time for it, whether it's in the beginning or whether it's on a break or anything like that. But setting a limit to how much it is that both agree on. And that way, when that timer goes off, it's time. And it's not arbitrary. Both people are prepared to transition, and you can move on smoothly from there. How about if this is the opposite scenario? What if they are hyper fixated on the Civil War because they are avoiding a topic that you need them to discuss? What might change about how we can engage with this? My playbook is anytime something is based in fear, something is based in anxiety, we're going to want to take some time to soothe those fears before we just try and muscle into it, right? Um, in some ways, it's a little bit more straightforward than the joyous option here. Um, the If they're doing something to avoid it, it's much less about what they are doing and much more about what they're avoiding. So, opening a conversation with the student about how they're feeling about the topic. You can kind of spiral around the topic a little bit and get a sense of where the student is coming from, what they're thinking about, what is there a specific part that they're afraid of? Is there a reason that they're afraid of it? There's a difference between I don't think I'm good at math, so I'm avoiding it, and I don't want to talk about this science concept because something really traumatic happened to me in science class, and that was what was being taught that day, right? Um, so having a little bit more care around this topic, um, but giving the opportunity to identify why this is happening, and then um, engaging in that CPS framework conversation about here's why we need to cover it, getting the student engagement and the student understanding of why it's important, or acknowledging that this may be something on the GED, on the necessary information test that I just made up a test on whatever test they are aiming for, that they will be accepting a disadvantage by avoiding. And that might be something that your student is okay with. Um, you can always save it and come back. Take it little bits at a time. You can put it down and revisit it at a later time. Maybe the student will be more comfortable. Maybe more things will change in their life. But just identifying why the anxiety is there and how the student thinks that they can solve the problem, or if they're willing to engage with the problem at all. Because I can see an opportunity where that is the case. So, great job with the practice scenarios there. You can see that there is the problem as it presents in your tutoring session, and then there's the wider explanation. There's the broader community like context of it. Um, so there is very much a part of this that is your prerogative as the tutor, and then there is a part of it where that is not your place, that is not your job, and you have supports available for you. So let's talk briefly about the resources available in our communities that students may benefit from, and with the caveat that your students can all be connected with necessary resources through Literacy Pittsburgh. So when we are talking to outside resources, we do it with our students, not for our students. And students can refer themselves to Literacy Pittsburgh, and we will connect them to the resources, or students can reach out to the resources directly. I say that now because we're going to talk about the outside resources first, I believe. So every single one of us learns to work with or around behavioral challenges in our own lives. I myself have ADHD. I am working through things with time management every day that I exist, right? If part of the learning involves seeking outside help, Literacy Pittsburgh can help our students to be connected to a number of resources. As the tutor, you can speak with your student about these resources, but the student or appropriate Literacy Pittsburgh staff member will make referrals for you. So you don't need to be hunting down resources for them. We have people on staff for that. As always, and as I mentioned before, it is always the student's choice when to seek assistance, if they ever do. Some examples of resources that are available in this area for students with disabilities. We have supports coordinators. So that is a job position sometimes provided by the county government, sometimes provided by contractors to the county, who, for qualifying people with disabilities, will organize their housing, education, whatever they need to be happy, healthy citizens and to meet their goals. They will be there as a constant support throughout their lives. This is not unilateral. There are caveats to this, but this is something that some people will have available to them. Another common resource is the Office of Vocational Rehabilitation, or OVR. OVR assists people with disabilities to achieve their career goals. So that can be providing funding for school, that can be job coaching, that can be guided employment scenarios. They have a number of different options. And related, but kind of a sister organization, there is also a department for blind and deaf services that can also assist with career scenarios, including accommodations at work as well. A third option here are advocacy organizations. An example of this is Achieva. They can help smooth barriers in many areas of the individual's life. And sometimes we'll have contracts with other organizations to offer things like buddy systems for your first day at college so that you don't get lost. There's a number of other scenarios there, but there are too many to counter announce here. So. For mental health, addiction, and recovery resources, there are many groups throughout the Pittsburgh area. For addiction recovery, there are active Alcohol Anonymous groups, Narcotics Anonymous groups, Sex and Love Addicts Anonymous groups, and I'm sure many, many more that I'm not aware of. There are also counterpart groups that are specific to the family members of people in active addiction or recovered addicts. Those would be Al-Anon, Nar-Anon, S-Anon, and I'm sure there are equivalent groups as well. Jewish Family and Community Services, or JFCS, is another really great resource in the Pittsburgh region. They are all over the place. They have hands in resettlement, but they also have hands in mental health. JFCS offers group therapy or like support groups that are specific to an identity in the same way that addiction recovery groups are. But they also offer ones that are specific to various immigrant and refugee communities as well. So they can have some really niche topics there. So at Literacy Pittsburgh, we offer supports We offer supports to connect students to outside resources, like those listed on those previous slides, as well as barrier reduction support for things like housing, food insecurity, transportation, all of those more concrete needs that may not be necessarily related to a social or emotional disability or some kind of mental health diagnosis, right? In order to access those resources, you can find more information by talking to your program coordinator or going to the Literacy Pittsburgh student portal. I have that listed there. It's just lpstudent.com. And once you go there, you can see a tab with jobs, career path, college pathways, supports. If you are referring a student for something other than employment, you're going to want to go to the supports tab, and there will be some information there. Please only refer students with their explicit consent, preferably together with them, because it's going to ask some specific information. And we will reach out directly to them, not to you. So we don't want to blindside anyone. Okay. Students also have access to the student portal, obviously, so they should know about it already. You as the tutor may want to and benefit from reminding them that this is there for them. So when you're referring students through either of those options, they're going to meet with one of these in Literacy Pittsburgh supports. The Immigrant Services and Connections, or ISAC, is an Allegheny County only agency. They serve immigrants and refugees living within those county lines who are in need of barrier reduction services. For example, housing and homelessness interventions, food insecurity, mental health resources, things like that. Literacy Pittsburgh also has service coordination. This is for American citizens or any student living outside Allegheny County. So I cover Beaver County, so I'm very familiar with these service coordinators. They cover the same things that ISAC does, they just serve different student populations. These are things that your program coordinator will be able to identify for you. So this is just for your information. Finally, and because it's a very common request, if your student is experiencing employment-related barriers, you can refer directly to career services. They have drop-in hours available and updated on the student portal website. And this is for all Literacy Pittsburgh students. There's no division of ISAC or Literacy Pittsburgh for career services that way. And they can help with all of the career and employment related needs, including the straightforward job search, resume assistant stuff, but also if you're working with non-American born students, you can ask about credential evaluation, getting degrees transferred from other countries, and a number of other questions like that. Okay. So I am going to cut the recording here so that we can have a discussion about specific students. But thank you very much for attending, everyone who is watching the recording. Let's